a leader needs to be on their A game every day. If you're tired, not feeling well, your wife's mad at you, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. When you see that employee, you may not see that employee again for 6 months. If you're not pleasant with that employee, then how do you expect them to go out and be pleasant with those that they serve?
This is episode number 50 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so grateful that you joined us today. I hope that you're doing well and taking care of yourself. My goal on this podcast is to bring you content that will inspire you to take care of yourself on your journey to wellness. That's why I'm bringing you these conversations that will give you some tools and insights and ideas to live your best life. Today, my guest is Steve Dye. Steve currently serves as the Chief of Police for the Allen Police Department, which is a community of about 111,000 residents located in Collin County, Texas. Recently, Steve retired as the city manager for the city of Grand Prairie, Texas, where his responsibilities included oversight of the city's operations and its 1,900 employees. Today on the show, we talk about police leadership in a society that is often antagonistic toward law enforcement. And we talk about the importance of the role of leadership in modeling desired behaviors and creating a supportive environment. And we talk about how a comprehensive wellness program that addresses the emotional, physical, spiritual, and financial support are crucial for the well-being of law enforcement officers. You don't want to miss this one, so stay tuned. Hey, I would love to know what you're getting out of the show. So please consider sending me an email or leave a review on YouTube or Apple Podcasts. And stay tuned for a future announcement for a show that includes you. Yes, I want to have a few of our listeners on the program to hear from you. So watch out for a future announcement about this amazing opportunity. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And invite your tribe to join as well. And your tribe is your family, your friends, your coworkers, anybody who you think would benefit from listening to or watching this program. Share the links. If you find this content helpful, share the wealth. Thanks again for being here. And now here's my conversation with Chief Steve Dye. Well, Chief Dye, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the program today.
Well, thank you for having me, Conrad. I think this is an important topic that we're going to talk about, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Well, I've been in public service for 40 years, which means I started when I was 5. Absolutely love it. I became a city manager a few years ago at the request of the city of Grand Prairie after I'd been chief there for 9 years, and a great experience, learned a lot. But, at heart, I'm a cop. So I came back to policing for a couple of reasons. We're in a crisis, Conrad, and I felt like with my experience and maybe what I could bring to the table as a leader, that I could not just help a department, but help the profession. Mm-hmm. And so this has been my lifelong dream when I was a kid to be a police officer, and I've been one of the fortunate people in this world to live out that dream. Mm-hmm. So I came back to see what I can do to help my beloved profession. Mm-hmm. These men and women are in such a more difficult environment than ever really before in the history of American policing. And let me give an example. Back in 1984, when I started at the Houston Police Department, we were kind of like the fire department. We could burn the house down to the slab and we would still get cookies the next day at the fire station, right? Right. The fact of the matter is, all kidding aside, we weren't nearly as well trained or well equipped back then. We weren't nearly as good as what we were doing back then because we just didn't have that development and that awareness. We're so much better than we've ever been before in American policing with our community policing efforts, our level of professionalism. But unfortunately, we're less respected by some than ever before. Mm-hmm. So it's a very sad irony. So grew up in West Texas on a farm and a ranch. But again, I always wanted to be a police officer, drove 8 hours from home to get my college degree, and again, started with the Houston Police Department, What may make my career a little bit different, I never aspired to be a chief of police. I didn't even want to be a sergeant. I spent my first 20 years at the line level, patrol, SWAT, narcotics. I was a motor officer. At the urging of my wife, I promoted and I quickly ascended to assistant chief and then chief. And It's where God needed me to serve, right? I'll always miss working the streets. I would have been happy to have been a career street cop, but that's not where God needed me to serve. So the last 20 years, I've been at the chief or city manager level. So again, I'm just able to serve and help in a different way.
And for our audience, our connection and the way I connected with you was through Todd Jerry at Garland PD. And I know you served in Garland for a number of years.
Yeah, I was in Garland about 14 years. That's where I went from being an officer to an assistant chief. Left there in 2010, became chief in Colleyville, then chief in Grand Prairie for about 9 years. Went over to City Hall for about 3 years, and I've been back in Allen where we used to live. Been back here for about 6 months. Todd is one of those examples that I was referring to. A servant's heart, highly trained, highly dedicated to helping others and to the profession. So good at what he does to give back and to make it better. And so when Todd Jerry asked me to do something, my answer is always yes. He's done so much for the wellness in our profession. And I know that's what we're going to really focus on today. And I'm glad because this is probably the most important subject right now in policing because it really meshes into our crisis in recruiting and retention. That all goes together, and I'm sure we'll dive into that. It's all related. So for years, and I know that you're probably going to ask me a little bit about this. For years, when I started in 1984, there was a stigma about wellness, and I'm looking forward to talking about that as well.
What was your perspective, or how did your perspective change or refocus with your experience as a city manager?
Well, I think really one of the things that I learned is very few people outside of policing really understand policing. Everybody here's the myth that's out there today. The myth is most people or a lot of people don't support us anymore. That's really not true. What we've done, we've let some activism and some hatred, quite frankly, take hold of the narrative. But the reality is most people in our country are good people who still support us. Here's what I learned through that experience at City Hall. The supportive families don't want their kids to be cops. So what we're seeing is we've created the haves and the have-nots in policing. The haves of the departments, typically medium-sized suburbs like Grand Prairie and Allen, where we're hiring officers from other agencies primarily. So when I started the academy in Grand Prairie, we started our own police academy in 2012. I would have a class of 15 or 20 recruits. Let's say 20. 15 of those would be brand new kids. 5 would be lateral officers. When I retired as city manager, that class of 20 was probably 17 or 18 lateral officers and only 2 or 3 brand new officers. So it's flipped. So I don't have a lot of openings right now in my department, but I almost primarily hire officers from other departments. We call those laterals. Well, my model is not sustainable because if we don't have enough young people coming into the profession, then I'm not going to be able to hire as many laterals. So ultimately, while we kind of have the haves and the have-nots, the really small and really large departments are particularly suffering. Everybody is suffering. And then you add in the fact that now a lot of departments are lowering their standards to fill their openings. We are hiring across this country in some departments people who should not be police officers. I'm going to go ahead and say it. So what you're going to see is a self-fulfilling prophecy in that we are going to see more police misconduct because many departments have panicked and lowered their standards. But the reality is we've got to get our country back to understanding that policing is a noble and honorable profession, that you want your kids to go serve in policing. It's a difficult environment, yes. We need leaders that will support these officers and stand behind them so parents will feel comfortable encouraging their kids to serve in this way. That's really the problem. The support is generally still there. It's just that nobody wants that kid of theirs to be a cop. And I understand that, so we've got to regain the the branding and the marketing of our profession back to where it should be, that this is more than ever before an honorable and noble profession. Look at the fall of any civilization, or look at the problems in Mexico and other countries. It's all predicated on a weak or corrupt policing system. So we need to wake up in our country and understand that we've got to support our police and encourage our young people to be police officers, to get that quality into the profession. Now, I'll close with saying this. There's a tie-in with wellness here that I want to dig into, but I will tell you, the young kids that we are getting into the profession are more dedicated and committed than ever before. They're not looking for a job because they're coming into a profession that's not as popular as it used to be. They're really wanting to serve. So the kids that we are getting are fantastic. They really are. At least I know in most of the departments here in North Texas.
Do you think some of that is a result of, without throwing all of the media under the bus, do you think some of that is the result of, we know, TV works with, if it bleeds, it leads. It's that sensationalism. It's that thing that, gets eyeballs on the screen. Do you think some of that has to do with, in some of the problems with recruiting and retention has to do with that?
Well, I think in some parts of the country, it's, you talk about in my experience at City Hall, I think the political leaders are not understanding that you can't just not prosecute crime and expect people not to flood into high dollar retail stores and walk out with handfuls of expensive clothing. It's not going to work that way. We have to be a country of rule of law. Now, with that said, even those people that we incarcerate, we need to treat them with dignity and respect. But we can't just ignore problems and hope that they go away. And sometimes people need to be put in jail because they violated the law and there needs to be consequences. And so what you're seeing is politicians and some city leaders across the country that have tried this soft approach on crime or the legalization of narcotics. None of it is working. Crime is going up. Quality of life is going down. And what we're seeing and hoping for is it's cyclical. They're realizing there's a balance there. You need to have a balance there. Compassion and empathy with holding people accountable for their actions. So I think that's one problem is some of our leadership. And then I think the media for a while in some parts of the country kind of fed on the fact that when there was an incident of police misconduct, they really focused on that. And then what happened, Conrad, is because we all generally wear the same type of uniform, we all became stereotyped. So there's percentage-wise, there's many, many, many more cases of medical malpractice every year in our country than there are people dying criminally at the hands of police. It's not even close percentage-wise. But we still see our doctors as heroes, which we should. But you have percentage-wise a lot more doctors making egregious errors than cops, but their mistakes aren't nationally televised, right? So, the other thing that people understand, police departments are different. We're not all created equally. So, when I see an officer with his knee on someone's neck for an extended period of time and the surrounding officer's not doing anything about it, I know that while my department is not perfect, my culture would have dictated that those officers would have removed that officer. That's a cultural issue, right? So that's one example of how we can be really different, right? So I think the media, everything is cyclical. In North Texas, we enjoy a really good relationship with our media. They do try to run and focus on some of the positive stories. So I think that's getting better. But I think there for a while, yes, it was just every night we were hearing about something that a cop did wrong, and it's hard to keep. Think of the officers on the streets. I mean, I've been around a long time. Rodney King, Ferguson, George Floyd. I mean, these are good cops that are miles away from these incidents that had nothing to do with it. But every time something like that happens, they take it in the shorts as if that was our department. And when we talk about wellness, think about that environment for a minute. I want to go back to what I started with. We weren't nearly as good 40 years ago as we are now, but we were heroes everywhere we went. So what we didn't have to contend with back then was the daily pressure of people arguing with us, questioning us, filming us with their video, on their cell phone. We have to wear our own body worn cameras. Think of the daily stressors that causes on the environment in the last 15, 20 years that is new, and think how that can affect the wellness.
And it blows me away when I see videos on social media of, a police officer pulls someone over and they're just belligerent and even rolling down their window to talk to someone. It's like, if you just do what the officer says, they'll probably let you go.
Well, let me preface this by saying there is never an excuse for the egregious use of force wrongfully applied against a citizen. There's never an excuse. And you've heard it a million times. Nobody hates that worse than a good cop. So I'm not excusing bad behavior ever. But if you look at almost every use of force incident, whether it's within policy or criminal action by a police officer, so let's run the full gamut. Any use of force, regardless of the scenario, 99.9% of them were predicated on noncompliance by a citizen. So again, I'm not excusing bad behavior or criminal behavior, but what I tell my community is comply then complain. Whatever it is, however you agree with it or don't agree with it, just do what the officer says, because I can promise you something in my community. If you'll just do what the officer asks you to do, you may not like it, but no one's going to get hurt or killed. I'm just, so we've lost in our country the notion of many times we've lost this concept of self-responsibility. I had a situation where I had a female officer pursue a male subject, and she ended up tasing him, and he skidded across the parking lot and had a lot of injuries. And some of the activists in the community came after me, and I said, time out. First of all, don't be in a suspicious place in suspicious circumstances. Don't have a warrant for your arrest. Don't run from the police. When the police officer tells you to stop, stop. And then guess what? You wouldn't have got hurt. That was never mentioned until I brought it up in response to this, this outcry from a handful of activists. So I think most people understand that, but I think, Conrad, it's incumbent that we have strong police leaders. So when that happened to my officer, I didn't just sit back and try to pacify the activist. I went out on the camera and said, time out. Let's have a conversation about self-responsibility. And by the way, she didn't shoot the guy, did she? She applied her taser. So, and the community and the pastors in that community backed me up, but we've got to have strong police leadership. And I think that's where working for 20 years in a lot of pretty high stress assignments as a cop, as a street cop, if I'm ever a good chief, that's probably why, because I've done the work. And all I ever wanted to know was that my administration supported me and appreciated me. And I think we've got a lot of great chiefs across the country, but I think sometimes chiefs need to be more assertive in backing up their officers who, by the way, are performing the most difficult job in America, in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to talk about wellness, but first I want to kind of continue this leadership thread. Do you think that as a chief, you are serving at the request of the mayor, and generally as a police chief? Now, if you're a sheriff, you're an elected official. But as a chief, do you think sometimes some of the poor leadership that appears to be in law enforcement is because a chief is submitting to what the mayor or the city council wants?
Yeah, and in Texas, we're largely city management form of government, so the city manager hires us. Well, I think, generally speaking, mayors and city managers tend to leave the policing up to the police department because most of them understand that they're not the experts in that field. I don't know if it's really direction from local political leaders. I think it may be more subconsciously or consciously an effort to retain their employment. I think that sometimes the chiefs may get a little bit uneasy about what that's going to do to their employment. I've mentored a lot of young chiefs. I'm one of the senior guys around now, and what I tell the young ones that are interested in being chiefs is we have a lot of discussions. But one of the things I tell them is you better have a set of values that are worth losing your job over. Now, I don't want you to ever initiate that or take advantage of that or unnecessarily, inflame a situation. But if you're not willing to stand behind an officer who did the right things for the right reasons, even if it means you losing your job as a police chief, then don't sign up, because that cop is dependent on you to support him or her when they're doing the right things for the right reasons, and for you to be the buffer between them and politics. In our community, we enjoy a very stable political leadership and city leadership. That's not the case in every country. I've turned down jobs before because I didn't feel like the support above me was going to allow me to do what I needed to do to properly lead that department. So it does take a team, and that's where there's some dysfunction. So you get in those local political environments to where they do want to kind of dictate what the police department does, or they're not willing to really go and stand in front of a camera and say, hey, we back this officer up. Well, in those situations, sometimes those chiefs are certainly going to be more reluctant to be more assertive in protecting their officers. And again, we're going to be the first ones to say if an officer violated policy and needs to be terminated, that same good chief is going to be the first one to say, look, we made a mistake. We're transparent. We failed. We corrected it. Now, 99% of the time when officers make mistakes, they don't need to be terminated. We just need to work with them, help them get better. But there are those egregious issues, right,
Sure.
where we've got to hold them accountable. So, it's a two-way street. We can't, we never want to support, encourage, or validate bad behavior. But at the same time, most people don't understand how difficult the job is. And that's really all cops want. They just want to come to work and serve the public, do what they love to do, but know, hey, if things get a little out of hand and I do the best I can and I do the right things, even if it's not perfect, I know that at the end of the day, my administration is going to support me. Mm-hmm. And that's that culture that really helps you attract and retain officers. Mm-hmm. Again, even the good cultures across the country are still having some difficulties because there's just not enough people. There's not a large enough pool of applicants.
I was talking with someone yesterday, and we were talking about this whole thing of being supported in your job. If you have an organization and your employees know that the leadership supports them and takes care of them, they'll do anything for you. They'll work for longer hours and less money sometimes if they know they're going to be supported. But if you're not supported, man, they're out the door.
Yeah, you hit on another key word that relates to wellness is taking care of them. Mm-hmm. And I like that because we should look at our employees as family. We should, as chiefs, look at our team members much like we do our children. You're not always going to like your kids, but you better always love them. Right. So, just foster that environment where they feel valued. They know that you're going to care for them. They know that you're going to support them. Easier said than done, sure. Quite frankly. But it's important because, again, I go back to the bigger picture. Unless we want dysfunctional communities to ultimately result in a dysfunctional society, we need to wake up, America. You are not producing an environment that is encouraging enough young people to get in this very noble profession. And you as a community will suffer the consequences. Mm. You will. I tell my community all the time, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you that you love your police officers in this community and know that we're going to work hard with a high level of integrity and ethical behavior to make you proud. When we fall short, we're going to remedy the situation. But thank you, because a community gets the police officers, gets the level of police department that they support.
Well, that's a powerful statement. And it goes back to what I just said. If you feel supported, you're going to do everything you can to provide resources for that community, right?
Yeah, and again, harder today than it was 40 years
Sure.
ago because I didn't have a camera strapped to my chest. See, what we forget as a country and as a society, police officers are human
Mhm.
beings. We're not robots. We're not perfect. We have emotions. We're going to get mad sometimes. We're going to get, we're going to lose our temper. We're the trained professionals, and the expectations are high. But if I've got an officer fighting for his life and he's cursing, I don't have a problem with that. I've been there, right? So we have to remember that we're not machines,
Mhm.
and this job carries over into your home life. It affects your significant others. It can affect your children. I mean, it's a powerful job in terms of being able to positively impact the lives of others, but it's also a very powerful job in what it can do to your mental, physical, spiritual, and financial well-being.
Mhm. How has your views of mental health and wellness changed or adapted over the years?
Well, I'm an interesting case study, if you will. In 1987, I was in my first fatal shooting. I had a Chief David Kunkel, legendary chief, that told me that I was going to go to the psychologist, and I said, "Chief, I'm good." He goes, "No, you misunderstood me. I'm not asking you. You're going." Because Conrad, back in 1987, we didn't. That was a sign of
Mhm.
weakness. Well, he was a very innovative chief, and I was the first officer that he ever done that to, and I may have been the first one in the state of Texas or even the country back then, and I I stayed very close to him until he passed away about a year ago, and I told him many times, "You saved my career. I would have never gone." After my shooting, my two buddies came over, and we did what we did back then. We went to a baseball game and we went and drank beer. And one of those officers that came over had been in 3 fatal
Mhm.
shootings. Well, he's dead now because he didn't understand how to properly uh, process that trauma. 6 months after my first shooting, I went back to the psychologist. I asked to go back, but I didn't tell anyone, Conrad, because didn't want to be seen as weak.
Mhm.
So nobody knew I went back. But those 2 visits saved my career.
Mhm.
So now, fast forward, of course, we send you at least twice. We maintain vigilance and surveillance on you. We have chaplaincy programs, peer support programs, a myriad of different licensed professional counselor and psychology avenues for assistance. So it's amazing now how we embrace it. It's just so great to see, because my first 20 years, you just went out and had a beer and you didn't
Mhm.
worry about it, and then so you bottle up all that stress. And a psychologist explained it to me really well one time. He said, "Steve, stress is like a glass, and stress is the water, and you fill the glass up, and if you don't go get proper help, you're not going to be able to empty the glass. So you're gonna carry that stress around with you forever. You're never going to empty that water out of the glass." And that visual made sense to me. So that showed me a long time ago the importance of wellness. So now, fast forward, both in Grand Prairie and Allen, we've created the Fit Force programs, and there's 4 cornerstones. There's emotional, physical, spiritual, and financial. I came up with spiritual and financial a number of years ago because spiritual means be involved with something that doesn't involve work. It can be religion, a hobby, meditation. Just do something where you're not thinking about work to decompress. And then financial, I always worked overtime. I always worked 60, 80 hours a week to pay my bills. I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills some weeks. So that creates a lot of stress in your marriages and your lives, and that affects your work. So we're also very big on the financial
Mhm.
cornerstone. I think it's a comprehensive approach, not just physical and emotional, but spiritual and financial as well.
I remember talking with a chief out in California, and he's in a suburb of San Francisco, and he said, in that area of the country, of course, it's a very expensive area. Rookie cops, start making 80 grand a year, And he said, when you have a cop that comes in and they've been working, some other job where they're getting paid half of that, now all of a sudden they have this big paycheck, and they're like, oh, wow, I can go buy a truck, I can go buy a boat, I can do all the things. And pretty soon they find themselves having to work overtime just to make those payments.
Yeah, it happens. And, even accounting for inflation, the officers nowadays make a lot more money than we did back in the day. Again, even accounting for inflation. Some of the older officers complain that the younger officers never want to work overtime. And I'm like, time out. Good for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want. We don't want them always working overtime like we did. That's called progress. We now have a wage that actually pays us a good cost of living salary, to where we're not just having to work all the time. Again, I worked all the time just to have a decent quality of life. And of course, it varies depending on where you live in the country. But in North Texas, you don't really have to work overtime. And then if you do, hopefully that's to save for something in addition to, not just to pay for the expenses that you incur. So I think that's one thing that's helped us. We were always equivalent to teacher pay. And then over the years, we kind of moved ahead of them. And I feel terrible for teachers, because you talk about another tough profession. But yeah, I think that financial piece, what we do, Conrad, is we give all of our new employees financial planning training. And we volunteer them to go sign up for deferred comp. That's part of our onboarding process, because I tell them, I can't make you sign up for deferred comp, but I'm going to tell you have to, because when you're older and you have a lot of money, you're going to think, that old chief, whatever his name was, I'm sure glad he made me sign up for deferred comp. But I had a sergeant in Grand Prairie that got into financial planning. Nick Darty has the financial cop company. He's awesome. We bring him in. We do financial planning training, and not just for our officers, but their significant others. And I just think that's a very important part of wellness that historically wasn't talked about enough. He was one of my sergeants in Grand Prairie, and he had a real passion for financial planning, and we started working together, and he's done really well, and he's still does so much to help the profession, and so grateful for him and his team.
The National FOP had a study a few years ago where they looked at all the stressors that law enforcement goes through, and the top two were administration, and I think it was also like scheduling or staffing issues. Do you concur with that? That's a huge part of the stressors of a police officer?
Yeah, I think the admin, we all understand. We just talked about it, right? That support and appreciation. I get it. Yeah, I think where they're going with staffing levels, I agree with. Most departments now are running with quite a few vacancies. So they're having to mandate overtime to fill minimum staffing requirements. So on patrol, you can't, if you need 20, you can't just work with 5, right? So you're going to have to mandate people to work. So what they're talking about is, because of all the recruiting and retention issues, that we're having to make these, even when they don't need to financially or don't want to, we're having to mandate them to work overtime, and they're getting tired, right? So we've implemented maximum work hours per week in our department to regulate that. We have rotations for who we call in to work overtime if that has to happen. Right now I'm fully staffed, which is an anomaly. That doesn't happen very often. So we're kind of in a good way, but that's kind of some of the things that we do to kind of mitigate those. But yes, I track exactly where the FOP is going with that, and I think that's very accurate.
What do you do in your department and your agency to encourage your officers to really take care of themselves physically, mentally, spiritually, and all those things?
Well, it starts with me. I'm very big on physical fitness. The main reason I want them to live a long time, to take good care of their families, but it's going to help them be better police officers. Physical demands are an integral part of our job description. So we're not apologists that we're going to be in shape. Now, what we don't do, we don't shame, we don't make people feel guilty. We meet people where they're at, and we just want them to get better. We've implemented an annual physical fitness testing. It's fully incentivized, not punitive at all.
Is that typical? For agencies to do that?
No, it's not. I started in Grand Prairie, and I brought it over here. It's not, but being physically fit has saved my life. 1987, I told you about that with the robbery suspect. There's been other examples. So I understand it firsthand that it can and will save your life, but you are a more effective police officer the better shape that you're in. So annual physical fitness testing we've implemented, it's incentivized. It's all positive. It's not negative. It's about you and your goals. And hey, next year, I want you to score better than you did this year, but we don't compare. We don't shame. I have a great team. We published workout plans, nutrition plans. We build custom plans for anyone in the department. We provide the workout equipment. I provide time on duty for them to work out every day. They can work out on duty. That's another thing that we've implemented. Money well spent. What we saw in Grand Prairie, and I know we're going to see it here, fewer workers' comp claims, less insurance cost, less sick time usage. It all translated into decreases in all of those areas. And I think it just created a happier employee. They had more energy. So that's some of the things we do to encourage that. And then again, I think at the top, I need to model the desired behavior. If I want them to be physically fit, I need to be physically fit. If I want them to work hard, I need to work hard. And so goes the list, right? If I want them to be happy and pleasant with citizens, I better be happy and pleasant with them. If I expect them to work hard, I don't need to sit up here in my office all day. I need to be out and about. I think it's pretty simple leadership, but the reason I don't know that it always happens is it's very difficult. Leadership is the most rewarding thing that I think professionally you can ever do, but it's also the most exhausting thing you can ever do because there's no finish line. A leader needs to be on their A game every day. If you're tired, not feeling well, your wife's mad at you, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. When you see that employee, you may not see that employee again for 6 months. If you're not pleasant with that employee, then how do you expect them to go out and be pleasant with those that they serve? So, again, leadership is hard, but when it works out well, it's the most satisfying thing, I think, professionally that you can ever feel.
What are some things that you do personally to take care of you?
I get up early every morning and I get my workout knocked out because what'll happen is I'll get busy at the end of the day. I'll have an evening time function. You run out of time, you're tired. So I start by prayer and physical fitness. I'm not one that is like a super healthy eater, but my diet is one of moderation. If I want to have, a dessert, I have one. I just don't have one every day, right? So moderation in diet and regular exercise are the two keys that I found that help me: regular exercise, moderation, and diet. And then getting up early and getting that workout done at the beginning of the day where it's behind you. It actually gives you more energy during the day. And then you don't have to worry about missing that workout at night because you sit down in the recliner and you don't want to get up. And then again, I think spiritually trying to decompress, get away from work mentally. At points in time regularly, try to have hobbies or religious activities where you're separated from work. And then, I think showing gratitude. I think the more that we can show gratitude on a personal level, professionally and in our personal lives, I think gratitude is a very healthy component of what, helps me. I think the more gratitude I can show, the better I feel physically. I think there's a correlation there.
So how important is it for you to have relationships with people outside of law enforcement?
Well, that's been a problem historically. Back in the day, we didn't really want to associate with anybody who wasn't a cop because you just didn't really understand what we go through, which there's some truth to that.
Sure.
So we had a lot of choir practices. We never spoke about work at home. I've been in trouble more times than I can remember because I don't talk about work at home. And then, my brother-in-law, who we were cops together, would tell his wife, and then she would tell my wife, and then I'm in trouble, right? So I think what we've kind of learned as we progressed is it's very healthy to have relationships with non-police officers because you're not always talking about work. They tend to overall may at times be a little bit less cynical. A refreshing viewpoint on the world. we see the underbelly of society, and that can kind of affect our conversation. So I still prefer to be around cops just because we have a lot in common, and our personalities tend to bond. But I also think it's equally important to have those outside relationships. I think both is healthy, right? But I think also go beyond that. We're trying to get better at teaching our younger generations to talk about work with those that they care about. Again, we never did that because we wanted to shelter them from the bad things that we saw, but we've learned that that's actually a healthy outlet for us. And we weren't really sheltering them. We were frustrating them because they wanted to be in our world and we weren't letting them into our world. So it's actually healthier for them. I've learned it's going to scare her a lot less. What it may scare her at times, particularly when I work the streets, was far outweighed by the benefit of her being able to share my experiences and support me and us talk about it, and her understand why maybe I was in a bad mood when I came home that day. So I think there's a lot of benefit to both aspects.
So let's talk to that chief who is perhaps in an area where they don't have resources for mental health and wellness within their department. What should he or she do to get the ball rolling there? How can that person convince the city, bean counters to spend the money on a wellness, initiative?
Well, I think there's three things before you ever really have to spend a lot of money. Know your people, know them as individuals and care about them. Make sure that your executive team and your command staff knows that our number one job as a leader is to care about our people. So we need to know what's going on with them. How are their families? Do they have sick kids, wives, husbands? So know your people, care about your people. That costs us nothing. And that's the most important starting place, is actually invest in caring about and knowing your people. As I always say, I don't hire people. I welcome people into the family. And I mean that. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is reach out to your local religious leaders. You want to have that relationship with your faith-based leaders anyway, but then select a few that will serve as chaplains. They will all do it for free. They're not going to charge you, and they can come in the building, spend time with your team, and be there if some of your team wants to talk to them. I think the third thing is form a peer support group. Ultimately you're going to want to get them trained, which is going to cost a little money, but not a ton of money. But form a peer support team. So what I like to do is I want to have internal resources to where we care about our people enough to where they're comfortable going to each other. I want to have chaplaincy program that they're comfortable reaching out to a chaplain. And I like to have multiple chaplains. And then I like to have a peer support team. We just added 10 new members. I was really glad to see that, because when we put a call out to expand that team, 10 people were selected, which is a great turnout. And then the other thing is I like to have a relationship with a third-party counseling team that understands law enforcement. A lot of times cities will have, they'll have counseling programs that are available to employees, but sometimes that staff, that LPC or that psychologist doesn't really understand policing. So I like to have a third-party relationship with a public safety organization that understands the stressors of police and fire. Now, that one does cost you money, but the first ones I mentioned are relatively low cost or free. So that would be my advice. And then as you implement that physical fitness and you start to show results in a positive way, my employees are healthier, they're more productive, that's going to help you go back to your city manager or mayor and say, look, here are all the things we're doing. We have less lost time from work. We have fewer accidents. We have higher productivity. Our morale is much higher. So wellness works. And if I can have some resources, we can become even stronger. But make your case first through some of these in-house inroads, and then that'll help you build credibility to get those resources. You can benchmark. You can actually end up, if you have a high-functioning wellness program, it'll actually pay for itself. But you want to benchmark it. When you start your wellness initiatives, you want to benchmark workers' comp cost, insurance premium cost at the police department, lost time from work, productivity. You want to benchmark all of those. So when you show improvements in those categories, then you can go back when you want to spend money on maybe working with a counseling service or bringing them in. You can show that you freed up dollars, either soft or hard cost. We're not in the revenue generation business, but traffic stops is an easy one to point to. Typically, departments with higher morale are going to be out on more traffic stops. Typically, departments with lower morale, the discretionary time of the officer is not going to be spent as much proactively. And part of that proactive work would be traffic stops. Well, traffic stops can result in increased revenue. That's not why we do it. I never ask my people to do that, but it's just a result of a higher functioning, higher morale, more fit department. So there is savings and revenue generation for the city and for the community. There just is. I mean, not to stereotype, because it's not always true, but generally speaking, officers who are more physically fit and mentally, spiritually, and financially well, they're higher producers. There's a direct correlation there, right? So one of my passions for wellness is not just taking care of my people, but I know that the better we are with wellness, the more productive my team members are for the community. They're going to serve my community at a higher level when they're more fit.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So how important is it for you, or is there even a peer support for chiefs and people in your position?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's what, again, I tell the younger chiefs, you need to have 3 or 4 chiefs on speed dial that you can call and vent to. So I do it 2 ways. My number 2s and 3s, my chiefs, my assistant deputy chiefs, when we meet every week, I tell them, everybody in here has a star on their collar. This is a safe space. We can vent, we can brainstorm, we can get frustrated, we can laugh. This is a safe space. We're going to talk about work, but this is also a safe space because you need a place to decompress. Because when you're at the top, you've always got to be on your A game. So you need a safe space where you can come in and let your hair down, so to speak. And then the number 1s, the chiefs. Here in North Texas, we have monthly lunch meetings. The larger cities have another monthly lunch meeting that we meet at. We all know each other. And then I always tell them, have those 3 or 4 chiefs that you can call and go, man, I don't know what to do here. Or, gosh, I'm frustrated about this. And we do that. We're always talking to each other as peer to peer, because this is it's a very difficult position, particularly in today's environment with the expectations. The chief's job has never been more difficult, which is actually one of the motivators for me to come back.
Well, Steve, it's been a great conversation to have. I think you have a model for that other agencies and chiefs can take after, and I really appreciate your insight and taking time to talk to us today. Is there any final word that you want to share with the chiefs out there and with law enforcement in general?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. What you're doing with first responder wellness is so important, because all of us depend on having great police and fire departments and communication specialists. It's not just those in the profession. Our communities are depending on public safety being healthy and sound. So thank you. I would tell all chiefs out there is none of us have it all figured out. I don't. I'm always looking for new ideas, other programs that other departments are using. So, network, form relationships, find out what's going on, reach out, see what programs are working. My door is always open to help anybody, but equally, I'm going to be reaching out to you, because the more we collaborate, the better we are. And then finally, support and appreciate your people. I know in your hearts you do, but you've got to show it, and you really have to show it when times get tough. Never put your job over doing the right thing.
And we'll leave it at that. So
thank you, Conrad.
So much. Thanks, Chief, for joining me today on the podcast. It's leaders like you who are making a difference, and I appreciate you sharing your insights. And thank you for listening or watching. I really appreciate it. I'll be back here next Wednesday with a brand new podcast episode with another first responder leader, so stay tuned. And remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.